Hello, welcome to Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob, and this is a stats deep dive for Age of Sigmar 4. This is actually pretty exciting. Me and Rob, so Better Rob, that's what we call him, are very precious about producing the Age of Sigmar stats. We've been doing it now for about 8 years. There's been other multiple contributors over that time period, but we've consistently kept up with it. I've also done stats analysis and stats reviews for that entire period of time. Therefore, I'm quite precious about when we release the stats. You got to remember, over the course of Age of Sigmar 4, where we are now, people have still been learning how to play the game, even in tournament/event settings. And so I haven't necessarily taken all of the information on, no, I haven't taken it to heart, is what I'm trying to say. And I've waited for my stats crew to start putting that information together. And this is where, and only 6 weeks into the tournament scene, we can start to get an idea of what the game starts to look like. I've seen lots of YouTube comments from many of you, and if you go read down below, where you said things like, one of the ones that's very common is like people are like, oh, Dawn Riders are busted in LRL. But all the lists that I've looked at on the Stat Center show that I do every Monday have featured either Wind Chargers or Sentinels, or they featured Foxes and haven't featured Dawn Riders. What happens is we get in this kind of like self-reinforcing mentality where we think the things that we think are definitely true, and we go and look for that validation. One of the things that I like about doing the stat show on a Monday, and also this stats deep dive we're about to do now with loads of graphs and information and numbers, is because it really starts to put that into context for us as a group. Also, what's really fun is it means you can have really good conversations with the players at your local club or at events. Do you think you want to play at a local club with your friend and their army might be, according to the numbers, a little bit stronger than yours? This gives you a good indication of that maybe being true, but this is still very early. And what I meant about us being precious is I don't want to get too bogged down in the numbers, like to make it like the game is all over, you know what I mean? I don't want people to say the game is over and it doesn't really work, because that's not the case. I don't think that's the case at all. There's just lots of trends and things to be conscious of. And right now, this is the first time I think we can start to actually put some good, healthy information out there, which is good. So that's why we're always precious. Never just go straight in with that first week hot take, even though that would be incredibly good for my YouTube numbers. I could have like week one be like, Nighthawk broken, question mark. You know, that could have been something I did, and you can just keep doing that. But that's not what I want to do. I want to have a bit of personal responsibility about this, because I'm also a member of the community. So let's jump in and look at all of the numbers. Sorry about that rant, the little bit of the intro. So the first thing we're going to look at, the first thing we always look at, is the meta representation. These are all available. All these graphs are available on the honestwargamer.com. That's where you can go find all this information. Why do I think this is the most important? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, it just shows you who's popular. Slaves to Darkness are the most popular army, and we have to have a whole conversation about these armies, why they are or why they aren't popular, and there's multiple different reasons. But the number one reason, if we're using this as a way of analyzing how good armies are, is when you have a large pool of players, you have the widest skill variance across an army. So if you have, like with Slaves to Darkness, you have loads of people who are good and loads of people who are not as skillful at playing Age of Sigmar. You've got the widest skill pool available to you. You also get, and we've seen this many times in the past, when we go and talk about Tzeentch in a bit, you see that Tzeentch are a little bit below what would be the perfect balance. So if a faction was getting perfectly represented, it'd be about 3.7% of the meta. So Tzeentch is a little bit lower than that number, but their win rate is really high. Why is that the case? Well, Tzeentch is quite a hard army to play. It's one of those armies that's got what I call quite a high skill ceiling. Therefore, there's less players playing it, and only the players that really understand how the army works are out there playing it. The other version of this is Ironjaws. Ironjaws is much lower represented than the average, and their win rate is also, when we get to it, very low. But that's because the people playing Ironjaws on the other side of that are people who just like Ironjaws. Maybe that's their only army. Maybe that's the army they like. Maybe it's an army they've tested. Maybe people like me, they thought big pigs were a good idea and it was a terrible decision. But either way, they're people who really like the army. And probably there are also people who really like Tzeentch. But sometimes there's a conversation about why people are playing armies and why people aren't. And that informs those win rate numbers that we're going to look at later. So it's always the most important thing to look at. Most popular army, Slaves to Darkness. Second, Nighthawk, the boogeyman in the room. Then Lumina Throne Lords. Then we've got Stormcast Eternals. Then we've got Soulblight Gravelords. Then Bone Reapers, Seraphon, Gits, Ogre Tribes, Magickin Nurgle, and Sons of Behemoth and Skaven are all over that line. Let's jump out straight away to the Stormcast Eternals. As a starter army, they often are the most popular faction, but with the great culling of all the armies that Games Workshop did, maybe we lost a load of Stormcast players or a load of Stormcast armies. People can't be bothered to repaint them. Maybe people are a little bit scared about committing to Stormcast in case they get deleted as well. Super fair. Slaves to Darkness being the most popular because Slaves to Darkness are badass. They're everything Stormcast Eternals are, but they are just the goth edge emo version, which is super cool. It's just for everybody who likes Disturbed and loves wearing corpse paint. Slaves to Darkness, off we go. And they are a great new model range. They're really easy to paint up. You can paint them with just dry brushing and washes. There's a little bit of trim. You don't need an incredibly high model count. They've got arguably the best war scroll in all of Age of Sigmar in Be'lakor there, which is also a massive point sink as well. Varangard is super easy to pick up and put on the table, and it's very easy to play. So that's Slaves to Darkness. Nighthorn, incredibly good in-game, really easy to pick up, very cheap. They're available in magazines. They were in a starter box. Very, very popular, but the Nighthorn being 7.2% the meta and having the win rate they have is what we would call a problem. Because, like we've said, when they've got such a large variance in skill, you've got, your absolute dribbler playing them, and you've got, your most skillful player in the world playing them. That means if their win rate is also through the roof and isn't more averaged out by the low skill players, that means that the army is even better than it seems on paper. Lumineth Realm Lords, they came out during lockdown. They are super popular. Why is Lumineth Realm Lords up at 6.7% when Deepkin are at 2.6%? It's because Lumineth came out in lockdown. They got 3 releases. That was when most people, not most people, but lots of new people joined the hobby. It's probably some people's first, second army. Massively popular. High Elves reintroduced into Age of Sigmar. They're just good. And guess what? They're incredibly good in the game as well. Everything that was good in Age of Sigmar 3, it was good now. Sentinels are still good, unbelievably good. So Foxes still good. So all the units that were good are still good. So you can still play them, and that's true for Slaves to Darkness as well. All the units that were good in Slaves to Darkness, Varangard were incredibly good in Age of Sigmar 3. They're incredibly good now. Be'lakor is really good. Be'lakor's great now. So you're not seeing players not have to reinvent how to paint their armies or build their armies. Stormcast Eternals, big drop off. And also 6.7% of the meta. Their win rate is definitely going to be lower than it could be, because almost always some of the newest players are Stormcast Eternals players. This means that they are still learning how to play, and therefore the win rate for Stormcast is lower. Stormcast have featured in a few 5.0s over the course of the past 6 weeks, so they're still solid. Soulblight Gravelords, in my opinion, is an S-tier book. All the strengths that they had last edition are kind of pivoted over a little bit. I still think that they're going to be finding their feet. But Soulblight were a super popular army last edition, so that's just transferred over, especially when people have got all of the units that they need. Oathshark Bone Reapers, as we know, they were kind of the boogeyman in the last edition, still very popular, and then they've just transferred those over as well. Seraphon, kind of regardless of whether or not they do well or don't do well, are similar to, I would say, Sylvaneth, in that they are just stand really hard by lots of people. Seraphon really popular with all sorts of new people who enter the hobby, but also very good. Gitz, again, and Seraphon, Gitz, and Sylvaneth, I think, and probably Skaven to a lesser degree, are these just incredibly iconic armies, and so they're played a lot because people love those armies a lot. But Gitz also very strong. Ogres, seeing a resurgence, that's quite popular, but Ogres were popular before, but mainly because the production meta on them was really low. What do I mean by the production meta? Being able to build and paint armies takes time. Let's jump over to the other side of the graph and look at that. So if we go and look at Cities of Sigmar, brand new release, in my opinion, an incredibly good book. It's a high skill ceiling, very hard to play, but they're very hard to hobby. Very, very hard to hobby. Do you need to go pick up some new dwarfs or some new elves to play in that army because you're not sure? Have you ever tried to even build 10 Fusiliers, let alone paint 40? That's a bit of a nightmare. Cavaliers, super sensationally detailed. Another good example of that. I think Cities of Sigmar, by the way, a quite good army, but their meta representation, in my opinion, has got nothing to do with their ability to win games and got everything to do with their difficulty of hobbying the army. Hedonites of Sinesh, similar army. Why are Nurgle so much higher than them? Well, it's because Sinesh is just super hard army to hobby. And also, at the start of Age of Sigmar 4, and I've seen this over multiple different editions, some online commentators have said that they're not very good. But we've already seen them win events and already have a pretty good win rate. So what's going on with Slaanesh? Well, they're hard to hobby and they're difficult to play, and therefore people don't necessarily play them. It's much easier to buy 6 Vanguard, spray them black, do a bit of trim, than it is to even ever build 10 Blitzbarb Archers. And it's easier to play them, and Slaanesh is harder to play. So that's why you see the disparity all the time. I'm unsurprised by Kharadron Overlords down here. Kharadron Overlords got absolutely ruined in the Age of Sigmar 4 update. I think that's what I'm going to call it as now. They got no ability to play in several of the different phases, but most importantly in the magic phase, which is super impactful. And so they're just here languishing at the bottom with 2 armies that have been deleted out of the game, Beasts of Chaos and Bone Splitters. Daughters of Cain down there as well. I think Daughters of Cain they need a new model range to get people excited about playing them, but they're still absolutely solid. So that's the meta representation. Use that as a kind of and give you some idea of what armies you might face off against as well. That's another good example. So with Slaves of Darkness and Nighthaunt being the 2 most popular armies, you're in between a rock and a hard place. So with Slaves of Darkness, they have really good armor saves, so you need a lot of rend to be able to punch through their very high armor. No problem. Then we go to Nighthaunt, and they ignore Nighthaunt over there, and they ignore the rend. And now, what are you doing? You're paying points to do one, and then that's not helping you in the other. Okay, and then Nighthaunt are really fast. They're starting to fast enough, and then LRL are really fast, and you need something to deal with them at range. So you've got this kind of real tough position as a list writer at the moment here. Let's go look at win rates, and let's just bite the bullet. Nighthaunt are broken. That's the statement. Clip it and ship it if you need to. But Nighthaunt are broken. They have a 64% win rate, but most importantly, they have a 7% meta representation. This means not only are they too good, they're too good across a large skill set. So the worst players or players who aren't particularly skilled are still doing very, very well with them. That is a tragedy for the game. Also, they are doing the Nighthaunt armies are doing something which you can't really see in this graph, which is they're also suppressing other sections of the meta. We've seen this in other breakdowns that we'll do in the future, but what this normally happens is you have an army or a couple of armies that cannibalize the other good armies. And so they start to suppress their win rates. So if we look at the other armies that are over good, I should mention that whenever we rate an army between 45% and 55%. This is something we at the Honest Wargamer have been doing for years. Games Workshop later adopted this methodology. And we only really ever use this system just to bully them. So just so we could give some red units and some blue units to push them. And eventually they finally adopted it, which was sweet. And then we're able to use that to... They start talking about it, which is wonderful. We like that. I'm glad that they've adopted what we've used because it's good. So the armies that are in the good spot, Lumineth Realm Lords, Ogres, and Disciples of Tzeentch, are they able to compete with Nighthaunt? Probably not. If you massively nerf Nighthaunt, what happens to those 4 armies, and do they just skyrocket even further up? That's what I meant about suppressing the other win rates, because it could be that Nighthaunt are so good that the other armies aren't yet getting their time to shine. And the moment that gets lifted off, they also skyrocket up. So you have to be very cautious when you are starting to try to, nerf things or rebalance things. I'm seeing a lot of people say that what should happen is, in an FAQ update, is they should bring up the worst performing armies and bring them up higher. That actually has not really worked, because the problem probably with Nighthaunt, and has happened in the past, is it's a systemic problem. It's to do with the rules that are in the units. Making them cheaper just creates a problem with bodies on the board, and giving them battle tactics, which you've seen in the past as a fix, has just meant that people aren't even engaging in the game and just scoring points. And this doesn't really interact with the problem that is everything that's wrong with Nighthaunt. And maybe we should cover that in another video. But Nighthaunt are massively broken. 64%. Now, this isn't the worst we've seen in Age of Sigmar. That's another thing to say. For the launch of Age of Sigmar 4, to have a single army on a 64% win rate is actually, and don't get me in the comments for this, is actually pretty good for Games Workshop. Games Workshop do not try to produce highly balanced, well-developed and thought-out games. They're the Fast and Furious franchise of making games. They just make something cool and fun, which is, I love Age of Sigmar 4. I think it's an incredibly fun game. They make something fun, they just ship it, they try and do some FAQs, they'll throw some points around, and then hopefully they'll get some numbers around the right category. That's what I personally believe. So this is actually pretty good for a Games Workshop game, which is, you know, a minimal viable product when they produce games. However, obviously, producing these graphs independently, because Games Workshop graphs also lie, because we've done that in the past. We've checked their graphs versus our graphs, and their graphs just don't tell the truth. So this is definitely how it works. These are the definitely true numbers. So 64%, too high. Lumineth Realm Lords, 57%. That's a little bit high. I think some of those units need looking at. I just think a couple of points adjustments. I'd like to see Wind Spirits get an adjustment up as well. I think that'd be good. I think also Lumineth Realm Lords win rate comes down pretty fast as soon as you make it so that you don't get +1 to hit and +1 to wound in your general against your general's regiment for shooting units. That's really going to neuter how good sentinels are. And then I think maybe foxes can just go up some points. Ogre Moor tribes, 55%. People calling them broken, not broken. You're wrong. They're just strong. 55% is fine. Disciples of Tzeentch, no one was expecting that. Everyone thought that they were a bit garbo. Turns out Kairos is carrying the faction. Great. Gets up there with Troggoths. Are Troggoths really good? Yes. Trolls are very good. The problem with this graph is that with Gloomspite Gits, you end up with a bunch of absolute cuties running their favorite, spider lists or whatever it might be, bringing that win rate down. So I reckon some troll adjustments would be pretty fine for the Gits. Soulblight Gravelords up there. Then we're into the safe category, and then let's go to the bottom. Flesh Eater Courts getting their asses kicked. Why? They've got no armor saves. That's a problem. The game is really fast now. That is a problem for them because they're getting hit, and they're getting hit really quick. I think they struggle in lots of different ways, which we could definitely break down in another video. Iron Jaws have no allegiance abilities, and they're slow. Sylvaneth win rate, it's an incredibly high skill cap army, tough to play. Their trees, their own allegiance ability, is a problem for them. It gives your opponents charge targets. It's really hard to utilize. All of your other armies just get like bonuses. You only get bonuses near trees, and they're tough to put down on terrain maps. Skaven, new army, I think right now. Give it some time. And then everything else I would take with a pinch of salt. But Character Overlord's okay. 43%. They're in that fine bracket. So even though they're not very popular, they're still doing okay, but they're definitely not doing very well. So I think that's a good little look there. The next thing to look at is this this graph. So this is a 3+ wins graph. This is my stat that I love loads. What this does is it says to you, like, I would like to play an army at the weekend that wins more games than it loses. So it has 3 or more wins. So the positive win rate potential, so the PWP. This is the graph for you. Okay, I want to take an army this weekend to go and win more games than I have lost. What army do I take? Nighthaunt. That's got a PWP of 69%. Obviously, that's nice. Now, this isn't as high as we've seen before. At one point, we had Gargants for over 8 months, so Mega Gargants, over 8 months with an 80% win rate. That's why I've got so much Gargant PTSD. Sorry, an 80% PWP, which is good. Now, if you take into account where Gargants are now, 35%, so you are likely to lose more games than you win with Gargants in Age of Sigmar 4. That is a massive shift as an army, and that is very huge. And if you look, many of the armies have got a very low positive win rate potential, with Sylvaneth being the lowest. So you're more likely to lose more games than you win with Sylvaneth. And then as you go up, Ogre Moor tribes, Disciples of Tzeentch, Slaves to Darkness. Now, Slaves to Darkness having a positive win rate potential of 54%, but also having a massive meta representation, means that they're actually a bit too good. They're actually too strong, because there's a huge portion of skill being played there, and they're still doing very well. So that is pretty interesting. Great armor saves, very tough combat units, right? That is, like, you know, a key winning factor for how you do well with units in Age of Sigmar, or how you win games in Age of Sigmar 4. Fast, hard-hitting units with good armor saves. It's the exact problem that things like Flesh Eater Courts have. They've got hard-hitting units, and some of the units are fast, but they have no sustainability, and that's the problem. They have healing and recursion, but you can't do any of that if you're dead. So that's that. And then talking about Slaves to Darkness, if we just look at the TWhip, so TWhip is something we also use to track the tournament in winning position. So what this does is this tracks your meta representation versus how likely an army is to be able to win a game and win 4 games before they lose their first game. So being able to win as many games before you lose your first game. The idea is if you lose your first game, you then go into the losers bracket, and then it's much easier to win the next few games because you're playing people who have lost their first game as well. That's how it kind of moves forward. But if you win your first game, then you play someone else who's won their first game. Then if you win your second game, you play someone else who's won their second game. And it gets statistically, or it should just get harder and harder to win those matches. So which army does the best until it loses its first game? And that is Slaves to Darkness. And that, again, is really interesting. It's just mechanically a tough army to deal with. Good armor saves, Be'lakor, shutting stuff down. Nighthaunt, also obviously in second place there. That's just because they're broken. They have an ethereal save, they ignore all rend, they're good on control, they're incredibly fast, they've got a hard-hitting army, they've got too many wounds on the board for how survivable they are, and that's what's going on there. And that is the first 6 weeks. Oh, sorry. No, one last thing is the battle plan distribution and encounter. Now, this is actually really, really important for a couple of reasons, because this is actually the meta-defining stat which people don't discuss enough. So if you take a look, you can see it on the left-hand side of your screen. You can see the percentage of games played with a certain battle plan. So all games in Age of Sigmar, 15% of those games have been played with the Jaws of Galette. 15%. And they're in 76% of tournament packs. So if we were to just take the top 5 battle plans, Jaws of Galette, Battle for the Past, Feral Foray, and the Vice, and shifting objectives. And if you were to put those objectives on the tabletop and look at those battle plans, ask yourself which armies would do well on those missions. We saw this in Age of Sigmar 3, in fact. At my tournaments, I started to change, and we will bring out these stats later in the year. What we did was we worked out what the win rate for each army was on each battle plan. So what I did was and it was pretty interesting because the top 4 or 5 armies performed really well on the 5 most popular battle plans. So what I did was I picked the 5 battle plans that those armies did the worst at, and I put those into the packs. That meant that immediately saw a shift in which armies did well at the event, because when you define the game as being those first 5 missions, then the meta and the armies that do well are defined by those first 5 missions. So as you start to change up, if you like Star Strike, Better Part of Valor, Limited Resources, the ones at the bottom, which are much more difficult, much more skill-orientated battle plans, immediately you then start to shift which armies could do well. Does that mean Nighthaunt aren't, broken? No. It doesn't. But what it does do is it starts to shift around some of the goalposts and change up how some of the armies perform. And this really this will give you some indication of how to mix it up. So even if you're just playing at home or playing in your local club, instead of playing the Jaws of Galette, which is a really fun mission and I really like, just say to yourself, let's play the Better Part of Valor. Let's play Star Strike. Let's see what that does to the game. Let's see how much that changes up our match, which is interesting because only having 4% of all games have ever been limited resources, which is a mission I always put into my mission packs just because it's so hard to play. And that is kind of good. Because it's, normally the player who understands the game better is doing well on those missions. So this is good because effectively the meta is defined by the armies that turn up and then the missions that you play. And the missions you play could actually be making some of the armies that turn up even better. So that's something to look at in the future. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please do let me know in the comments below. Please do share it with other people. I try really hard, and also so does my compatriot Rob. We try really hard to make really good and useful information so that you can make well-informed decisions about units you might want to pick up, armies you might want to play, how the game is generally looking, what you want to do in the game, what your event is like or your local scene is like. Because that's super important as well. Like, what's your local scene like? You could turn around to your TO and be like, hey, buddy, can we change up the missions? Because I think that'd be really beneficial just, for the game or for us as a group. you can do lots of stuff with this information. It's all free and all available there. And if you'd like to help support us do stuff like this in the future, you can join the Honest Wargamer Patreon, or you could just share stuff, like share it with people. That would be cool. But hopefully this has been really helpful information, really important information, so that you can get everything that you need. So thanks for watching the show. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.